The last 12 months have been the warmest in the last 1,25,000 years, with the world breaching the 2 degrees Celsius mark on November 17th, a number we were cautioned not to cross. This further highlights the importance of cutting down emissions, promoting alternative energy sources, and having proper loss and damage policies in place. But till now, all these promises have largely not helped. As we go on to report COP28, taking place between November 30th and December 12th in Dubai, here are some key moments in the history of climate talks. The formation of an Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, or IPCC, in 1988 was a major milestone in climate negotiations. By 1990, IPCC published its first assessment report. The report concluded that the global temperatures has already risen by 0.3 to 0.6 degrees Celsius in the last century and called for a global treaty that binds clear emission targets. Following this, a UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, was formed to tackle greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to climate change. In 1995, the signatories of UNFCCC held the first Conference of Parties, or COP, in Berlin, resulting in a final document that called for legally binding emission targets. In 1997, at COP3, a historical milestone, the world's first greenhouse gas emission reduction treaty, the Kyoto Protocol, was signed. The idea was common but differentiated responsibilities, where developed nations must do more to tackle climate warming emissions because they emitted the most historically. In 2001, at the 6th COP in Bonn, the governments reached a broad political agreement on the operational rulebook for the Kyoto Protocol. On February 16, 2005, the Kyoto Protocol went into effect without the world's biggest historical polluter, the United States. The protocol met a requirement for ratification by at least 55 countries, accounting for at least 55% of emissions. In 2009, for COP15 in Copenhagen, the US, along with the EU and basic countries, tried to galvanize a global treaty based on pledges and not legally binding commitments. The developing countries rejected this. In 2010, COP16 in Cancun failed to set new binding emissions targets, but established a Green Climate Fund. This fund was to help developing countries cut emissions and adapt to warmer world conditions. In 2013, delegates from poorer nations walked out of COP19 talks in Warsaw over a lack of agreement on climate-related losses and damage. Later, a watered-down deal was reached.
What we have realized is that here is the delay.
In 2015, the global average temperature rose beyond 1 degree Celsius over the pre-industrial average. This led to the first global pact at COP21, called the Paris Agreement. It calls for increasingly ambitious emissions pledges, called Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDCs, from both developed and developing countries. Delegates also pledged to try to keep warming to within 1.5 degrees Celsius. In 2018, young climate activists, including Greta Thunberg, captured global attention by conducting numerous rallies across the world to join in weekly street protests to demand climate action. In 2020, the annual COP was postponed amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The United States, under the then President Donald Trump, pulled out of the Paris Treaty. In 2021, at COP26, the Glasgow Pact set a goal of using less coal and resolved rules for trading carbon credits to offset emissions. Newly elected US President Joe Biden also rejoined the Paris Agreement. In 2022, COP27 in Egypt resulted in a historical deal for a loss and damage fund for costly climate disasters. The last COP did little to address the emissions fueling such disasters. As the world prepares for the next edition of COP, topics on finance, carbon markets, and global stocktake is set to enter discussions.